Perrin Carey, thank you so much for joining us today. I've got so many questions. I've been following your discussions with Lindie on the GGA webinars for the last couple of years. So thank you for being a supporter of the Good Governance Academy's events. As I said, everyone is welcome to participate. This is conversation style, but I would like to start off with a first point on something that's so top of mind for all of us, and especially now as Prof. Radebe mentioned with the King 5 report coming out in South Africa at the end of the month. So really, for many around the world, good governance is seen as a must-have. And the approach to governance has been one of comply and or explain. Very much a compliance-based approach to the application of governance codes. But we still see governance failures in the press every month. And Perrin, I can't think of a better person to come and give us some guidance on this. So in your experience, what do you find are the common reasons for these kinds of failures?
Look, thank you, Carolyn, and for your kind introduction and kind words, and welcome to everybody. Let's dive into that rather than dwell too much. So, governance is probably misunderstood, and I think there are elements of governance that have been and evolved from the human need to control and to predict and ensure compliance. And that's innate. That's within us. That's a foundational human need that we have. And so it's understandable that over decades of seeing corporate failure, seeing the impact of those corporate failures on different stakeholders, that we've approached this problem of poor governance through the idea, well, can we control and can we predict and can we uplift governance through a range of measures like legislation, regulation, codes of practice? And these are all familiar to us. We do it in many areas of business. Yeah. Look at health and safety, look at anti-money laundering, financial crime, fraud. All of these areas we approach through that perspective. But actually, we hold a paradox here because what we're trying to do is influence human choices. So the whole thrust of policy, procedures, controls, codes, and frameworks is to influence human choice, human decision making. And that might ring a bell to everybody here. Decision making. Well, that sounds like governance to me. Yes, precisely. So we've kind of fallen in, I believe, into a little bit of a trap. Not one we can't climb out of, not one that we aren't seeing many people speak about. But I think the answer to this paradox, this challenge of we're seeing this proliferation of codes and frameworks, and I applaud them all because they're there for good reason, good purpose, and a good goal and objective. But in governance, we're dealing with groups of human beings making decisions, putting those decisions into action, and making more decisions. And you can't control human behavior solely through codification frameworks and rules.
Mm.
You have to begin to understand the humanness of organizations. And that's where you have this interesting facet that adds in to the idea of we make decisions and then we do stuff. We decide, we do, we decide, we do. And we keep doing that, whether it's a board, whether it's a leadership, whether it's an organization, whether it's a book club, whether it's a FTSE 100, doesn't matter. That's what we're doing. But because we're groups of humans, we've got this really interesting facet called culture.
Mm.
So the prevailing culture, the emergent culture, and I use those words deliberately, culture is not static ever. It is constantly moving. And essentially, you've got these three interacting elements, and this is the way that Coast here looks and observes the idea of governance. And that is that it is the act of governing. It's the act of deciding that we're going to do something, doing it, and hopefully be getting some indication of how well we did it, and then go back and make more decisions. And that's governing. But because we're humans, we're influenced by the culture of the group, by our own experiences, our own values, our own expectations, our own experience and confidence levels. And all of these things interface into the nature of the decisions we make and how we do things. And so, coming back to your question of where is this problem arising? I think we're continuing to see corporate failure, poor ethical decision making, because we're not looking at governance as the act of governing as much as we should. We're very focused on a series of things that we should observe, see how well we're doing it, document a statement against it, pat ourselves on the back and say we comply with this beautiful framework. And they are, some of them, beautiful frameworks. But they don't get to the heart, in our view, in my view, and in many others around the world, as to the actual act of governing in the human setting. And that's really where our work has been focused on, Carolyn, as you know. It's the
Brilliant.
act. Yeah,
Uh,
so
Thanks, Perrin. I wonder if the people online have any contributions to make. I see Gift, you've got your hand up. Does this resonate with you, this move from just, okay, Gift has put her hand down, but this
Yes,
move, oh, there we
no,
go, Gift,
yeah,
this move from compliance to culture and behavior.
yeah, no, it's true. Because I'm from South Africa, right? We have these laws and policies and whatsoever, but our problem is implementation. And we had previous state capture commission. I'll talk about that. And their recommendation was that like the issue is with the procurement, supply chain management, where they do tend, where they manipulate the systems and processes. But now the problem is that like no one is held accountable and there are no consequence management. And most of the time we rely on whistleblowers, unlike having internal controls in our entities. Hence, we have a whole lot of issues when it comes to tenders. And sometimes if they get to that, like, you're on the wrong side of the law, they let you go without any, taking back the
Penalties.
money or, going for disciplinary hearings and whatsoever. So you just resign and it's the end of it. And
Gift, can I,
Mhm.
sorry to interrupt you. Can I focus on that point then? Because I think that's a very good one, is the issue of, so behavior, we can't legislate good behavior. And I think that's a very good point, Gift, that you're saying, is that, we can have punitive measures, we can have code of conducts, but bring in legislation, you can't legislate against it. So if I can take that back to Perrin now, you're talking about culture, and what Gift is raising is, how do we keep people accountable just through culture, because we can't regulate good behavior? How are you seeing that through the research that you're doing?
The issue is that like
Sorry, I'm just
when
asking. Sorry, Gift. I just want to ask Perrin to answer that.
okay.
Thanks.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay.
lovely. Thank you, Gift, and thank you, Carolyn. You're right. You can't legislate with behavior. What you can encourage and bring about connection with in terms of leadership is the connection between the powerful act of good behavior and the impact of good behavior on organizational performance. So let me give you an idea of what our research is beginning to demonstrate, and then maybe that will open further discussion. If I quickly drop to this slide here in my presentation, hopefully you can all see this. So we observed governance across hundreds of organizations, and we took sentiment from inside these organizations to understand what were the relationships between culture and essentially the nature and ethical performance of decision making and the implementation of those decisions. And what you'll see here is essentially three segments, three sectors. And at this level, within the model and our data set, you can see that there's very little differentiation. There seems to be an equal weighting of the role that culture plays in good governance, the role that decision-making plays in good governance, and implementation. Once you begin to go out and look more deeply, look at culture. Culture has got three core aspects, and obviously within there you can see behaviors. So behaviors are emerging as quite a significant attribute when it comes to organizational governance. But so next to it, you can see leadership and also purpose. But it's really when you get to the next layer within our research data set that it begins to really point a lens as to what attributes can influence behaviors. So not legislation, not regulation. What can we actually do? What activities can we enhance within inside organizations to support a more behaviors and ethical led approach to decision making? And the dark purple are the ones that we'll take a look at. And within the culture section, you'll see there's four. The first one there you'll see is embedding. That's embedding purpose and values into the decision making. The second one you'll see is values led within the behaviors section. And this is essentially saying the values that we are adopting as an organization need to drive the behaviors that we're seeing inside our organization. So there needs to be evidence of strong connections between the values that adorn people's walls in organizations and that is lived in the halls of those organizations. And then two aspects of leadership within the culture bucket that I want to have a look at, and they touch very much on the introduction that we had within this summit. Empathic, compassionate leadership. And alongside that, courageous leadership. So coming back to your question and maybe your observation, Gift, I would say the key aspects in terms of trying to get behavioral change inside organizations, and that can't be done through legislation, is through courageous, compassionate leadership that understands that the adoption of the clear purpose, driving decision-making, and ensuring that values drive the behaviors inside those organizations. And what we do is obviously we begin to help organizations measure where they are in that journey so that that can actually be measured. I'm going to drop back, come back and take any questions because I know we're conscious of time.
Yeah, thanks. And I see that Lindie has joined us. Lovely to have you online, Lindie. Thank you. You're welcome to put your camera on, and fantastic. I just want to, before I bring Lindie back on board, I just want to circle back to what we're talking about in this panel is reinventing governance. And we're talking about governing energy and climate transition. So how does this relate to governance and culture? And really where we started with this compliance mindset is the government can come along and say, we're not going to support green energy, or we're not going to support transitions to a net zero environment. But actually that is taking the compliance approach, from a regulation, and we're going to take away and destroy all of our regulations that have gone in for the green economy, for example. Talking from New Zealand today, New Zealand has just announced that they reversed their moratorium on oil and gas exploration, and they've just announced that they've got their first one since the moratorium has been reversed. Now, what we're talking about with you, Perrin, is that the compliance is not enough, and it's not something that's going to demand good behavior. We need the culture in the organization to shift us towards an awareness of intergenerational value and the impact that we're having around sustainability and our use of energy. So I think that's a very important starting point, because what you're saying is it goes down to the purpose of the organization. And yes, there's the comment from Damien, do we have the right type of leaders who can be courageous and compassionate? Lindie, welcome. I'd like to bring you in on this conversation where we're talking about compliance and culture and performance versus conformance. Would you like to weigh in?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone from Pretoria in South Africa. It's lovely to catch the last bit of your presentation. Thanks, Perrin. And before it's my turn, I actually have a question for Perrin. The term compassionate and courageous, or courageous and compassionate leadership, really rings true. And we have a need for that in so many aspects. But for myself as an educator, how do we teach that to students? How do you teach? Can it be taught? What are the values we need to teach our undergraduate students, for example, to become compassionate and courageous leaders?
And even our senior managers and our managers in our organizations. It's a very good question, Lindie.
Lovely. Wow. We could have a whole series on how we do that. But let me try and summarize the perspective that I would give. The first thing I would say is that compassion is a skill. It is something that you can learn and develop. And compassion is often born out of the idea that it's empathy, but with action. So in other words, empathy, we kind of understand, right? We understand that empathy is this idea that I can draw alongside someone else's situation, someone else's experiencing, and I can say, I've experienced something similar to that. We can never say that we've experienced the same, but we can say I've experienced something similar to that. I have an understanding and appreciation of what you're going through. That's empathy. And that's a really important aspect to be able to develop. And we'll talk about some of the things that we can do to develop that. But I think it's key that we understand that compassion is a step beyond that. Compassion is saying, I see where this person is. I see the struggle. I see the difficulty. I see what they're going through. And I'm now going to make a conscious choice, a decision to in some way try and move towards that person, not just understand them and say, I hear you, I see you, but actually I'm now going to move towards you and I'm going to offer the question to you, what can I do to help? Now we can translate that into organizational settings within purpose and governance and values. We don't just have to have that at the individual level. But how do we nurture and develop that? Compassion is really, it's a state of mind and a state of heart where we have developed so much personal awareness that we can really understand the emotions that we're experiencing right now, and that we can use those emotions and experiences to then move and step towards another person. And so how do we develop that? So we're thinking about the micro level here. We're talking about an individual person relating to another person. How does this change things globally? Well, imagine if there was this program that we could do all around the world that developed our own individual compassion. So then when I'm a middle manager inside a large organization of 4,000 people, and I'm working and developing on how compassionate I can be with the team that works with me, with the leaders that are working above me, then I'm actually having a ripple impact across my organization. So for me, compassion starts with me. It starts with me owning the fact that I own and have to own the accountability for my own behaviors, choices, and actions. The more that I can understand the way in which I make my own choices, how I speak to someone, how I write my emails, how I message people, how I write on social media, how I communicate with my boss, how I'm communicating with my people that I'm managing. All of those individual choices, hundreds of them each day, if I can slowly, incrementally improve the quality of those decisions so that they become more compassionate, more ethical, more understanding, more empathic, then the ripple effect that I'm having on 20, 30, 50, 100 people around me, all of the people that follow me on LinkedIn, 4,000, 8,000, 25,000, the ripple effect that I have on people around me is huge. But it starts with you.
Great answer. Thank you. Lindie, did you want to weigh in?
No, I fully agree. I just still find it challenging, not from what you're saying, but our task, say for me as an educator, teaching, accounting. And it's often we say the accountants that rule the world, don't we? um, and I want to train accountants that are courageous and compassionate, and that do have the moral compass, and that knows integrity. And I'm never quite sure how do I embed that in teaching accounting, for that matter. Um, what skills? I know in my field we've had a lot of focus on analytical skills lately in accountancy and accounting sciences, or those, that often become the CEOs, the CFOs, those charged with governance. And that's where the link now comes in with our session today. So I'm training the future, those charged with governance. And I'm not, and we're focusing a lot on analytical skills, but technical analytical skills. And it's being defined, and we list those skills tangibly, but these others, these that relate to values, to integrity, doing the right thing when no one's watching, for example. How do you teach that in case studies, organizational settings? We test them. Testing is quite easy, but embedding them, I find that challenging.
And can I add to that? Even more so when we have leaders of the free world, the democratic leaders, that are not preaching that are the antithesis of compassion. And that's not the only place that we see it, in this world and this energy and sustainability, this whole environment. Our social systems today are inherently uncontrollable and unpredictable. And we are supposed to now bring our communities, bring our organizations through and navigate with the purpose of the organization be not only, as the Brundtland Commission said, not only profit and profit maximization at all costs, but depending on your purpose of the organization, you'd want to consider people, planet, and prosperity more holistically. So governing energy and governing a transition in today's world with a compassion at you following not only your individual purpose, but your organizational purpose of sustainability for the longer term, not just short-term profit maximization. How do we do that? And Perrin, maybe just bringing a question to you that we have underlined, and you have been underlining, that governance should be treated as a performance exercise rather than a conformance one, to loop back to the beginning, so that those failures that we'll be talking about can be reduced. But how do we do this with all of this complexity and this instability?
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Lindie. I'll try and bring some of these things together. So you're right. We're living in probably the most uncertain period of history that any of us remember. And I think we're stepping forwards into an increasing uncertain future. I think we all accept that. So the challenge we face is that we have lived for the last 150 years with the idea that if I do this, I get this outcome. And we've driven our organizations in that way. We've driven transformational change in that way, and we're still doing that. We design beautiful Gantt charts and process flows, and we say that if we do this, 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 we will transform into this beautiful butterfly at the end. The reality in the data is very different. It doesn't matter whether you go to Deloitte or McKinsey or wherever. Transformational change has about a 20% chance of success, which is not great, right? Now, thinking about that,
Why is that? That is horrific.
Why is that? I'll explain why it is in a minute. I'm going to try and bring in Lindie's point here. When you're dealing with accountants and you're dealing with obviously the idea of financial prosperity, which is their principal focus, not their only focus now, good, but the main focus. how how can we have a conversation within an organization where they're going to be spending, let's say they're going to be spending £1 million on a particular transformational project in order to change the way in which they embrace, let's say, the climate issue within their organization. So they've got £1 million to spend, they're going to do that. If I turned around to you at the beginning and said, well, you're going to spend £1 million, you've got about 20% chance of success at the most. I don't think there are many leaders that would actually start.
Mm.
They just go, well, why are we even bothering?
Mm. And that's what we're facing with energy and just transition.
Precisely what we're facing. You asked the question, Carolyn, why? And the answer is because organizations and the interconnections between organizations, if we look at the macro scale, so governmental organizations, international organizations, private sector, public sector, this arrangement is incredibly complex. And I use that word deliberately. It's complicated, yes, but it's also complex. And what I mean by that is the fact that the outcomes of any intervention is precisely what you said. It's uncontrollable and unpredictable. We cannot predict the outcome. And that is why 20% of transformational change programs fail. Can we influence that? That was the question that we at Coastia began to look at over the last sort of 4 years. Can we actually influence that 20%? Is there a way in which we can understand, even at the organizational level? So let's just take an organization, so that not quite micro down at an individual, but let's go one step up and we're looking at an organization. It could be 10 people, it could be 10,000 people, it doesn't matter for us. Can we influence that 20%? Because if we can make that 20% much more attractive, coming back to Lindie, if we can make it so that actually it's more of a 50% chance, then actually our investment of £1 million sounds actually more sensible. We've actually got a higher probability of success than of failure. Well, that sounds a good story, right? The only way that we believe that you can do this with any degree of scientific rigor is to approach organizations as complex systems that are interrelated, interconnected, and therefore are not linear. They're non-linear. That means that small changes can result in macro changes. And therefore, if we can identify what small changes can I make to have the macro impact that I want. And so what we spent the last 4 years is designing a model of governance that looks at organizations as complex. The model the data that I showed you was a sample of what we've discovered. And what we believe is that, and the data is now suggesting that, is that 20% figure can be shifted to quite above 50%. In fact, probably approaching 60 to 65% chance of probability of change, of actually securing transformational change in an organization, meeting the objectives of that change, and that £1 million that we invested as capital, as my accountant saying, I'm investing this capital for transformational change, I've got a 65% chance. That's almost 250% more than the original opportunity. So how can we engage with the transformational change, just looking at climate change within an organization, having a more sustainable policy? How can we actually succeed in the implementation of that policy? I think we can do that with inside organizations. Connecting that to compassion, that I think comes through purpose, and it comes through the values, and it comes through the behaviors of that particular mission. So in this instance, it's our compassion for our earth that is driving us to implement this change. But we also need to make that mission financially realistic. Yeah. And I think that connects with the idea that, we can't impose survival and say, well, you have to do this, and actually we don't care if you survive or not, you have to do this, right? That's not realistic. We have to be compassionate with the people that we're speaking with, the groups of people, whether it's an organization, whether it's a group of organizations, whether it's a government, whether it's a country, whether it's us as the earth. We have to understand that we can't impose, but we can open up opportunity to do this in a much more financially sustainable way. And I think many organizations are seeing that transformational change fails so often and with such a high low, such a low degree of probability of success, it's very difficult to embark on it. But we believe that there are ways and means, not just through our own model, but if we were to expand that and looking at a more macro scale through the idea of complex systems, it is much more possible to understand and to not predict, but to begin to increase probability. There's a difference between saying I can predict, but if I do this, that will happen. That's much more maths. But actually, can we use maths to enhance the probability of an outcome, move it from 20% to 65%? Absolutely. I'm
just hearing, thank you so much, Perrin. Mustafa, do you have a question for us? Would you like to join the panel and ask us a question? Oh, you're just on mute. You just have to unmute. Oh, we still can't hear you. Sorry. I think there's probably something wrong with your mic. I'm going to try to switch.
Yes, can you hear me now?
There. Can. Thank you.
Yes. I would like to join the panel and ask some questions. Yeah.
Yes, ask your question.
I just actually joined, and I just want to
Okay.
first
All
of
right.
all
Just get to
get
know.
some basic. Yeah,
All
just join.
right.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So really what we're doing, what we're talking about here is that the initial discussion was really around compliance policies, energy policies, just transition policies, getting global regulation, COPs. We heard from Prof. Radebe, the COPs and the standards, and then we had a call to action that said we need to do something now. What does the next 90 days look like? And it doesn't, and going back to those governance failures and compliance versus performance, and what Gift was saying in terms of we have bad behavior, but nothing stopping it. It actually starts with the individual. And the leadership of the organization at the governing level is where it needs to start. So yes, you need to be aware of your regulations. You need to understand your policies. Yes, government needs to look at incentives for various just transition, needs to look at mining and extraction and energy usage at a more macro perspective. But at a micro perspective, at us governing our organizations, and I can call that micro,
Yes.
us
Right.
governing our organizations, we really need to look at the performance aspects and the culture, and it starts here. So when I do training on sustainability, the first thing I do ask boards is so where do we start from here? Well, you need to understand where you stand in
That's
this. So
That's true.
yes, would you like to ask your question, Mustafa, or are we going
Yes.
to open up for the floor?
My first
Okay.
question is, how do we build a financially sustainable model, especially for resource-constrained environments? They have a lot of issues with sustainability. What do you think will be some framework that can be developed today to address sustainability in environments that are really constrained when it comes to finance and other aspects that is needed to address these concerns? Especially maybe, let's say, yes, that's one key question I have, because I've seen a lot of examples where countries have ambition to implement sustainability, but they don't have the resources that require or needed to address these issues. So what framework can be developed, or is there any stage process where countries have to go through from stage 1, stage 2, until they reach the final stage? So this is a critical question that I already have, and I want to have some knowledge on how these sustainability models can be implemented in these kind of settings. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think that's an important question, is that all these, behavior, culture, purpose is all very well. But when you don't have the resources and you are a developing country and you are a startup, or you're an owner, manager, founder, So this is all sounds very, ethereal and not very practical. What do you do, Perrin? Have you worked with organizations that are resource constrained, that where you're trying to teach them about culture and they're going, "Oh, we're just trying to survive." Have you got experience in that?
Yes,
Um,
I've
Sorry,
experienced
I just want to,
working
no, no,
with.
I'm asking Perrin. Sorry,
Okay,
Mustafa.
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mustafa. And Lindie, I'm sure you've got some elements to contribute here. And I'm sure, Carolyn, you won't mind me talking briefly also about the development of the ESG exchange program and obviously the aspects that are being developed in order to support let's just say more resource limited organizations and countries as well. So I'll leave you to perhaps speak to that in a moment. I think I'll go back to what I was trying and maybe didn't make as clear a point before. When you observe organizations or a particular purpose, let's say, and Mustafa, let's say your purpose here in this particular group of humans, this country, is to move towards a more sustainable situation. What needs to be understood is that this process is not linear. And as a consequence, we need to understand not just the outcomes that we're seeking, which we'll obviously be able to make clear to ourselves. We need to obviously position ourselves in terms of the resource that we have to move towards those outcomes. And you're talking about a situation where it's perceived that the resources are not able to move you towards those outcomes. But I think some of that's because we look at these aspects as linear. And also we look at them as a singular relationship. So if I do this, I get one outcome. So if I invest this money, all that happens is this. But that's not actually true when you look at systems. Systems don't operate like that. Systems operate in a way in which you can actually, by doing one action, you can have an impact across multiple factors. And so what I think and this is something generally that I know is being talked about a lot in the sustainability space, and that is the use of systems thinking in terms of developing frameworks in order to support the implementation of more sustainable networks. So, and I know this is something that the ESG Exchange is also beginning to compile. It's beginning to compile a whole series of resources. And tell me if I'm wrong, Karen, but I'm understanding they're going to be free. So they're going to be free resources. They're going to be available to globally. And the idea being is that these resources can then be utilized by countries, by organizations, by groups of humans just simply endeavoring to make the planet more sustainable and to move ourselves out of the situation we're currently in. And so what we need to understand when we're approaching problems like this that are complex is that they are part of a system. And the better that we can begin to understand the system and move away from linear thinking, then I think the less resource that we have doesn't mean that we can have smaller impact. And I'll give you one just quick case study, because although it's not in the sustainability space, but it is in the organizational performance space in relation to systems thinking and approaching this. We worked with an organization that was looking to improve its culture. It needed to improve its organizational performance, but it felt like it had to invest almost 50 to 100,000 pounds in order to do so. We did an assessment of the organization as a system, and we gave them essentially what we call small nudges of change. Now, these small nudges of change didn't cost them 100,000 pounds. It cost them 1,000, right? 1% of it. They put those changes into place. And within 12 months of putting those changes into place, which cost them just 1,000 pounds, they actually transformed the culture in their organization to what we would describe as a drag culture, where culture is actually dragging the quality of governance down, to a drive culture, where culture was actually driving the nature of the decisions that were being made and the way in which they were implementing those decisions. So sometimes we see financial resources as being a limitation to transformational change. I would argue that actually, if we can change the way we think and change the way we observe the system, we can actually accelerate transformational change with limited resource. What it takes is a committed group of individuals.
That's
And
it.
that is what you need. All right.
Great.
You do need a committed group of individuals. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Apollo, you've got a question.
Yeah, thank you. And greetings to everybody. And thanks, Perrin. And mine is still on the same pursuit of you're having the same objective. Like the accountants usually find themselves in the middle of ensuring, for example, that we do things right. And yet parts of the team want to do the right things, whichever way, but you are looking at the same thing. Sometimes the accountants would want to talk about efficiency, but there is also the other sibling of effectiveness and so on. So my question here is, how do we get into a point where in the leadership point where you reconcile these different perspectives to such an extent that we don't get lost in the noise of saying it's a say we're doing the right thing. We then somebody else is insisting, even if it's right, you must do it the right thing. You must do it right. That conundrum sometimes bothers me. Let me say a study which I did only recently about the leadership. We're doing an issue with the recurring audit observations in the agency. All these recommendations are get recommended, implement, but when the auditors come back next, the same things are there. But what was surprising when they finally came to the data, it was actually the biggest problem was the leadership issue. The leaders not paying attention, the leaders over delegating to people who cannot make decisions and so on. So now let me go back to the question and say, how do we reconcile all this to the extent that now you're able to have all this focused into the same objective that everybody wishes to achieve? Thank you.
Alignment. Perrin, did you get that one?
I think so. It broke up a little bit my side. So apologies, Apollo, if I don't quite answer your question. We got our kind of 10-minute warning, didn't we, just now, Karen, say that there's 10 minutes left. I'm going to answer that question and try and do it with a case study that will take you through a journey of a client that we've worked with. And it will end in hopefully showing how both financial and non-financial reporting metrics can actually be observed and connected to the what I would call the kind of organizational human act of governing within organizations. And so what I'm trying to do is trying to draw together some of our themes here. So, we can have various purposes in our organization. We can have those embedded within it. But we also have financial obligations that we need to meet. So we need to marry these two together. We can't just say, well, let's have a wonderful purpose, but not worry about whether we're profitable. You need to be able to bring these together, right? So let's just try and do that if I can in the next sort of 2 minutes. I'll present and then I'll take any questions on this case study, hopefully. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you guys can all see that. So we measure 3 core attributes when we look at organizations. We look at the culture that's prevailing. We look at the quality of decision making and the quality and the way in which decisions are implemented. And we then have a model and a framework that looks at essentially 9 categories related to those 3 domains. And then on the outside of that, we've actually got 27 indices or factors. But let's just focus on these because it keeps it relatively simple. So this was an organization that came to us. They're a global fund manager. They wanted to utilize their culture. They believed more in order to improve non-financial and financial metrics. So this was the challenge, right? They wanted to be able to do that. What we're able to do is we're able to understand where people are in relation to each other, and where the organizational metrics are in relation to each other. So not just this is your score, but where are they in relation to each other? So on the left-hand side, you're here looking at the group of humans. This was the board and executive and senior management in this organization. And then on the right-hand side, you're seeing the actual 27 factors within the organization that we're measuring. So the blue will be the cultural factors, the orange are the decision-making factors, and the yellow are the implementation factors. So the first observation on the left-hand side is that people have wide perspectives, right? Very wide sentiment about the performance of this organization at this moment in time. And then if we look at their perception and sentiment around each of the aspects that we measure, you can see that there doesn't seem to be any real order or formation to these. What we would expect to see is a grouping of culture together, or a grouping of decision-making together, or implementation. We're not really seeing that. It's fairly chaotic. So what we did is we analyzed this data through the lens of complexity that I've already touched upon. We're looking at the interrelationships between these aspects, and we're looking at the system as a whole. We identified 3 of the factors, 3 of the 27 aspects that we looked at. They worked on 2 of those. So remember I talked to you this hour about I've got limited resources. So how do I focus my resource around the key factors that are going to influence the outcome? I've got a particular outcome that I need, but I don't have millions of pounds to spend on this. How can I do that most efficiently? We identified 2, just 2 of the 27 factors. They chose to work on 1. So think about this in terms of a project management for transformational change. It sounds counterintuitive. It sounds like, well, no, we need to change the whole organization. No, your organization is a system. We can change the system by understanding how the system interrelates and operates. That's what we do. So they did this. Look at the impact. Just the overall core domain categories, culture, decision-making, and implementation, just over 12 months, rose by 5%. All of them rose by 5%. But they had only focused on 1 aspect inside this organization. So there were 26 things they didn't even look at. So think about the investment, the financial investment. Your accountant's thinking, this is great. I'm spending a fraction of what you're thinking, and I'm now going to get this system outcome. And if we look at some of the percentages, so where they focused their effort was in the bottom right-hand corner, embedding purpose and values. That went up 9%. Great. I hope it would go up. We invested our money there. But it went up almost everywhere else as well. Sometimes even more than the factor that we were working on. Information quality rose by 13%. Information flow by 3%. Communication quality by 10%. So the whole system is performing better and more efficiently as a consequence of a narrow spend of money and resource, time and effort. But look what's happening inside the organization. On the left is where the organization was 12 months ago. Chaotic, random, nothing really driving anything, just a little bit disjointed. The one on the right, remember, culture is blue. Where do we want to be? In the top right-hand corner. The top right-hand corner is a high-performing organization. We have got an organization now that is being driven by its culture, driven by purpose, driven by values, driven by behaviors, driven by leadership. So we've transformed this organization that 12 months previously was chaotic, minimal spend. I can tell you anecdotally that they were expecting to spend about £55,000 on their transformational project. They spent 5. We just gave them key small things to go and do, because small things can have big effects if you know what the small things are. That's the challenge. This is what happened for that organization over the next period of 12 months. Obviously, these things are delayed, right? So when you do the transformational change, you're not going to see the transformational change on these metrics in that period. You're going to see it in following periods. EBITDA up 2, staff turnover down, organizational FTE up, diversity inclusion up, people engagement up, transparency and reporting up, enhanced goals and trusts up. All right. So if you're thinking about how can we have an argument, how can we have a debate with our key people of finance who are leading this organization, we want to invest money in organizational culture because we know that organizational culture, anecdotally, it does great things. Everyone's telling us. But can we begin to evidence that in non-financial and financial reporting? The answer is absolutely.